The accountant's ledger when slavery's debts finally came due all parts. The night Ezekiel Brown discovered the truth, he was standing in the back room of Charleston's most respected bank, holding a document that would shatter everything he believed about his life. His hands trembled as he read the faded ink by candlelight. It was a bill of sale, dated 1823, 32 years ago. And there, listed among livestock and furniture, was a name, Negro woman, Ruth, age 19, with infant son. That infant was him. Welcome to Dark History Chronicles. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold stories from America's past. Ezekiel had spent his entire life believing he was born free, the son of Samuel Brown, a white merchant who'd raised him in secret, educated him, taught him to pass as a light-skinned freeman. Samuel had died 6 months ago, leaving Ezekiel his accounting business and what seemed like a fresh start. But this document told a different story. You shouldn't be in here. Ezekiel spun around. Marcus Webb stood in the doorway, Samuel's former business partner, now the bank's president. His face was unreadable in the dim light. My father purchased my mother, Ezekiel said, his voice hollow. He owned her. He owned me. Samuel freed you both, Marcus replied carefully. Legally, you've been free since you were 6 months old. That paper means nothing now. It means everything. Ezekiel's mind was racing. If Samuel had owned them, then everything Samuel had told him about his mother dying in childbirth, about being born free, about their respectable family history, all lies. Where is she? Where's my mother? Marcus's silence was answer enough. She's alive, isn't she? He sold her. Ezekiel felt his world cracking apart. He freed me but sold my own mother. It was complicated. Where is she? Marcus moved toward the door, blocking the exit. Ezekiel, you need to understand. Your father did what he thought was best. He couldn't free Ruth without questions. A white man freeing a slave woman he'd been with, it would have destroyed his reputation. So he freed you, raised you as his own, gave you everything. Everything except the truth. Ezekiel slammed the document on the desk. Everything except my mother. Where did he send her? Thornwood Plantation. Up in the Georgia backcountry, near the Cherokee lands. But that was 30 years ago. She could be. Ezekiel pushed past him, the document clutched in his fist. Behind him, Marcus called out, "You're making a mistake. You have a life here, a business, a future. If you go looking for her, people will start asking questions. They'll discover what you really are." But Ezekiel was already gone, disappearing into Charleston's narrow streets, his mind burning with a single purpose: find his mother, or discover what had become of her. What he didn't know was that he wasn't the only one searching for answers about Thornwood Plantation. 3 days later, Ezekiel stood at the edge of a dirt road, staring at the ruins of what had once been Thornwood Plantation. The main house was a blackened skeleton, collapsed beams jutting toward the sky like broken ribs. The fields were overgrown, reclaimed by wilderness. No smoke rose from any quarters, no workers moved through the land. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. You won't find what you're looking for there. Ezekiel spun around, hand instinctively reaching for the pistol hidden in his coat. A woman stood on the road behind him, elderly, with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see through him. She wore simple homespun, but carried herself with quiet authority. "I'm looking for someone who was here 30 years ago," Ezekiel said carefully. "A woman named Ruth." "Ruth Brown," the woman said, and Ezekiel's heart stopped. "Your mother. You know her." "I was with her. We worked these fields together until..." The woman's expression darkened. "Until Thornwood burned. That was 15 years ago. The night of the Great Reckoning." "Reckoning?" The woman studied him carefully, as if deciding how much to reveal. "You've been living as a free man, haven't you? Educated, respectable, probably passing for white when it suits you. But you don't know the stories. You don't know about the accountant. The what? Come. She turned toward a path leading into the forest. There are others you need to meet. Others who survived Thornwood. Others who knew your mother. Ezekiel hesitated, every instinct screaming danger. But he'd come too far to turn back now. He followed her into the trees. The camp was hidden deep in the forest, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. 15 people lived there, former slaves from Thornwood and other plantations, runaways who'd built a hidden community in the wilderness. They'd survived here for 15 years, farming small plots, hunting, trading carefully with Cherokee allies, staying invisible to the white world that would destroy them if discovered. The woman who'd led him here was called Mama Sable. She gathered the camp's elders around a fire as night fell, and they told Ezekiel a story that seemed impossible. Thornwood was owned by Colonel James Thornwood, Mama Sable began. Meanest man in Georgia. Worked people to death, sold children away from mothers for profit, beat anyone who looked at him wrong. Your mother Ruth, she tried to run twice. Got caught both times. The second time, Thornwood branded her face with his initials. Ezekiel felt sick. But something changed in 1840, another elder continued. His name was Isaac, and he had scars crisscrossing his back. A woman appeared on the plantation. Nobody knew where she came from. She carried a book, a ledger, and she was writing down everything. Every person Thornwood owned, every punishment he delivered, every family he separated, every life he destroyed. She called herself the accountant, Mama Sable said. And she told us she was keeping track. That debts would be paid, one way or another. That the earth itself kept records of injustice, and when those debts grew large enough, the scales would balance themselves. We didn't believe her at first, Isaac added. Thought she was mad, or some abolitionist who'd lost her mind. But then Thornwood received his own ledger. A book that listed every slave he'd owned, every crime he'd committed, every life he'd ruined. And it gave him 7 days to make restitution. What happened? Ezekiel asked, though he could guess from the ruins behind them. Thornwood laughed at her. Burned the ledger, had his overseers try to capture her, but she vanished like smoke. Then, on the 7th night, Mama Sable's eyes reflected the firelight. The plantation burned. Every building except the slave quarters caught fire simultaneously. Thornwood died in the flames, along with his sons and his overseers. But none of us were touched. The accountant appeared and told us we were free, that the debt was paid in blood and flame. And my mother? Ezekiel's voice was barely a whisper. The elders exchanged glances. Ruth didn't come with us, Mama Sable finally said. She left with the accountant. Said she had work to do. That there were other plantations, other debts to be collected. We haven't seen her since that night. Are you telling me my mother is dead? No, Isaac said slowly. We're telling you she's become something else. A collector of debts. A keeper of accounts. There are stories from across the South, plantations that received mysterious ledgers, overseers who disappeared, slave owners who went mad seeing their crimes written down with perfect accuracy. And always, there's a woman with them. Some say it's the original accountant. Others say it's women she's recruited. Women who know the cost of slavery because they've paid it themselves. Ezekiel stood abruptly, his mind reeling. This is insane. You're talking about ghost stories, supernatural revenge. Look in your pocket, Mama Sable interrupted. Ezekiel frowned, then reached into his coat. The bill of sale, the document he'd found in Charleston, was gone. In its place was a new paper, written in elegant script he'd never seen before. Ezekiel Brown. Born into bondage, freed by accident of skin color and paternal guilt. Raised in comfort built on his mother's suffering. Debt unpaid, 32 years of lies, one mother lost, one lifetime of truth denied. Your father's accounts were never balanced. You inherited his ledger. 7 days to choose, live in comfortable ignorance, or face what you've inherited. His hands shook. This was impossible. He'd had that bill of sale moments ago. No one had come near him. She's watching you now, Mama Sable said softly. The question is, what will you do about it? Before Ezekiel could answer, a sound echoed through the forest, dogs barking, men shouting, the crack of rifles. Slave hunters. Isaac hissed. Someone betrayed us. The camp erupted into chaos. People scattered, grabbing children and meager possessions, disappearing into the darkness. Ezekiel stood frozen, his new ledger clutched in his hand, as torches appeared between the trees. A man stepped into the firelight, tall, brutal-faced, with a marshal's badge glinting on his chest. Behind him, a dozen armed men spread through the forest. Well, the marshal drawled. Heard there was a runaway camp out here. Looks like we hit the jackpot. His eyes fixed on Ezekiel. And you look mighty light-skinned to be camping with runaways. Got papers proving you're free? Ezekiel's documents, the carefully forged papers that let him pass as a freeman, were in Charleston, 3 days away. Thought so. The marshal smiled. Boys, we got ourselves a bonus. This one will fetch a good price down in Savannah. Light enough to pass for white means he's probably educated. Someone's valuable property ran off. As hands grabbed Ezekiel, dragging him toward the horses, he saw Mama Sable's face in the shadows. She mouthed 2 words. 7 days. Then she vanished into the forest, leaving Ezekiel to face the consequences of a debt he'd only just learned existed, and a reckoning he'd inherited from a father who'd never paid what he owed. What will happen to Ezekiel? Can he escape the slave hunters? And what role does his mother play in the supernatural justice sweeping the South? Find out in Part 2, Part 13:52 The Ledger of Shadows. The Price of Truth. The slave pen in Savannah smelled of unwashed bodies, fear, and desperation. Ezekiel sat in the corner of the holding cell, his fine clothes now torn and filthy, his carefully maintained facade of respectability stripped away by iron shackles and brutal reality. 3 days had passed since his capture. 3 days of being hauled through the Georgia wilderness in chains, treated like the property he legally was, listening to the marshal and his men discuss his potential value like he was livestock. That one's worth at least $1,500, one had said, gesturing at Ezekiel. Light skin, educated bearing, probably house-trained. Some rich family will pay premium for a butler or accountant who knows his place. The irony wasn't lost on Ezekiel. He was an accountant. Had been, anyway, in his other life. The life where he was Ezekiel Brown, respectable freeman, businessman, citizen. That life felt like a dream now. Around him, 40 other souls waited to be sold. Some were runaways like those from Mama Sable's camp. Others were born slaves being sold away from their families. A woman nursed an infant while trying to hide her tears. A young man paced his cell like a caged animal, rage and helplessness warring on his face. Ezekiel clutched the mysterious ledger, somehow still in his possession despite being searched twice. The guards had looked right at it and seen nothing. Now, by dim lamplight, he read the entries that appeared on its pages. Day 4. Debt accumulating. Your father Samuel purchased your freedom with money earned from your mother's enslavement. You built your life on her suffering. Every client you served, every dollar you earned, every moment of respectability, purchased with her stolen years. The scales demand balance. 3 days remain. You keep staring at that blank paper like it's got words on it. Ezekiel looked up. An older man sat across from him, perhaps 60, with white hair and intelligent eyes that had seen too much. His name was Joshua, sold away from a Virginia plantation for teaching other slaves to read. It does have words, Ezekiel said quietly. You just can't see them. Joshua studied him carefully. You're different from the others. The way you talk, the way you carry yourself. You've been living free, haven't you? I thought I was free. Turns out I was just passing. My father owned my mother, freed me, raised me white. I didn't know until, Ezekiel's voice broke. Until a week ago, I didn't know any of this. And now you're here, finding out what it means to be property. Joshua's voice held no judgment, only tired understanding. Welcome to the truth, son. It's a bitter drink. Before Ezekiel could respond, the cell door clanged open. A well-dressed white man entered, followed by the marshal. The visitor's eyes scanned the prisoners with the cold assessment of someone appraising merchandise. That one, he said, pointing at Ezekiel. Bring him out. I want to examine him properly. Rough hands dragged Ezekiel into the yard. The visitor circled him like a predator, checking his teeth, his hands, his bearing. You're educated, the man said. It wasn't a question. Can you read? Write? Keep accounts. Ezekiel said nothing, some instinct warning him that confirmation would seal a fate worse than simple field labor. The marshal laughed. He ran a whole accounting business in Charleston before we caught him. Smart as a whip, this one. Perfect for house service or business management. Charleston. The visitor's eyes narrowed. What name were you using there? Ezekiel Brown, the marshal answered before Ezekiel could stop him. The visitor's face went pale. Brown? Samuel Brown's, you're Samuel Brown's boy. Dread crawled up Ezekiel's spine. You knew my father? Knew him. I owed him money, a considerable sum. Money I was planning never to repay, since he died without proper heirs. The visitor smiled coldly. But if you're his property that somehow got loose and started pretending to be free, well, that's a different matter. I think we need to discuss your sale price privately, Marshal. They walked away, leaving Ezekiel standing in the yard, comprehension dawning. This man, whoever he was, saw an opportunity. If he purchased Ezekiel and revealed the truth about Samuel Brown's free son actually being escaped property, he could claim Ezekiel's entire business as restitution for debts owed. Everything Ezekiel had built would be seized, sold, used to pay Samuel's creditors. And Ezekiel would disappear into slavery, his identity erased, his life stolen. For days, a voice whispered behind him. Ezekiel spun around. A woman stood in the shadows of the slave pen, middle-aged, with a face that might have been beautiful before hardship carved lines of pain into it. She wore simple clothing, but carried herself with authority that transcended her surroundings. And she was holding a ledger identical to his. Who are you? Ezekiel breathed. I think you know. The woman stepped into the light, and Ezekiel saw the scars on her face, initials branded into her cheek. J.T. James Thornwood. Mother? Ruth Brown looked at her son with eyes that held both love and terrible purpose. I've watched you for years, Ezekiel. Watched you live free while I lived in chains. Watched you build prosperity on the foundation of my suffering. Your father freed you because your skin was light enough to pass. He kept me enslaved because I wasn't. I didn't know. I know you didn't. That's why I'm here now, instead of letting the scales balance themselves. Ruth moved closer, her voice low and urgent. The accountant found me 15 years ago. Showed me that my suffering wasn't random, wasn't deserved, wasn't God's will, it was theft. Calculated, deliberate theft of my life, my labor, my child. And she taught me to keep accounts. To track debts. To ensure they're paid. The plantations that burned were given chances to balance their ledgers. Most refused. So the scales corrected themselves. Ruth's expression was hard. But you, Ezekiel, you're different. You didn't choose this inheritance. You didn't know about the debt. So I'm giving you the choice your father never had: face the truth willingly, or let it consume you. What choice? I'm about to be sold to a man who'll use me to steal everything I've built. Exactly. Ruth's eyes glittered. You're about to experience what I experienced. Loss of freedom, loss of identity, loss of everything you thought was yours. And when you're standing in that auction house tomorrow, understanding in your bones what it means to be property, that's when you'll have to choose. Choose what? Whether to escape back into comfortable ignorance, or join us in balancing the scales. Ruth gestured, and Ezekiel saw other figures emerging from shadows: Mama Sable, Isaac, others from the forest camp. They'd followed him. They'd infiltrated the slave pen itself. We're breaking out tonight, Ruth continued. Everyone in this pen. We have contacts on the Underground Railroad, safe houses leading north. But we need someone who can get into the auction house records, identify which slaves are being sold tomorrow, trace them back to their plantations. Someone who knows accounting, who can read documents, who can help us track the debts across the entire system. You want me to join you? To become some kind of supernatural accountant for escaped slaves? I want you to choose your ledger. Ruth held up her book. Your father left you debts unpaid. You can spend your life running from them, or you can help balance them. But choose quickly, because in 3 days, whether you've decided or not, the scales will balance themselves. And you'll be on one side or the other. A guard shouted nearby. Someone had discovered the infiltrators. Chaos erupted as Mama Sable and Isaac moved with practiced efficiency, overpowering guards, seizing keys, unlocking cells. Ruth grabbed Ezekiel's arm. Come with us now, or face the auction tomorrow. Your choice, son. But make it fast. Ezekiel looked at the ledger in his hand, then at his mother's scarred face, then at the 40 souls beginning to pour from their cells into the night. He thought about his comfortable life in Charleston, built on lies. He thought about Samuel Brown, who'd freed one slave because of skin color while keeping another enslaved. He thought about debts accumulated and never paid. If I come with you, he said slowly, if I help balance these accounts, what happens to me? Do I get to go back? Do I get my life back? Ruth's laugh was bitter. Your life was never yours, Ezekiel. It was purchased with my stolen years. The question isn't whether you get it back. The question is whether you're willing to help others get theirs. Gunshots rang out. Guards were rallying, reinforcements coming. The window for escape was closing fast. Ezekiel made his choice. He ran with them into the savannah night, 41 slaves becoming 41 fugitives, his mother's ledger and his own burning with names and debts that demanded payment. Behind them, the slave pen burned, another building added to the growing list of structures consumed by accounts finally coming due. 2 days later, Ezekiel crouched in the attic of a safe house outside Augusta, surrounded by documents he'd stolen from the auction house during the chaos of their escape. Shipping manifests, bills of sale, plantation records, all the paperwork that turned human beings into property. And he was learning to read them the way his mother did. Not as business transactions, but as debts. This one, he said, pointing to a manifest. Riverside Plantation. They're expecting a shipment of 12 slaves next week, families separated from a Virginia estate. If we could intercept. We can, Mama Sable interrupted. She was coordinating with Underground Railroad contacts, planning routes north. But you need to understand, we're not just freeing individuals anymore. We're dismantling the system that makes this possible. Isaac spread out a map of Georgia and South Carolina. Red marks indicated plantations that had burned. Blue marks showed estates where owners had chosen redistribution over destruction. Yellow marks were targets, operations so brutal, so indebted, that natural correction was inevitable. Your mother has been tracking these debts for 15 years, Isaac explained. But it's bigger than one person now. The accountant, the original one, she's teaching others. Creating a network of record keepers who document every crime, every theft, every life stolen. And when the debts get large enough, we collect. By burning plantations? By giving them choices, Ruth corrected, emerging from a back room. Just like I gave you. The ones who refuse to balance their scales willingly, those burn. The ones who choose restitution, those survive. We're not seeking vengeance, Ezekiel. We're seeking balance. She handed him a new document, a ledger page covered in names and numbers. This is Blackwood Plantation, 50 miles south. 200 slaves, 3 generations of accumulated debt. The owner, Marcus Blackwood, received his ledger yesterday. He has 6 days to decide. Ezekiel studied the accounts, his business training making the mathematics brutally clear. There's no way he can pay this. Even if he sold everything, divided the land, compensated every person, he'd be ruined. Exactly, Ruth said quietly. That's the point. The system can't balance its debts without destroying itself. Every plantation owner faces the same choice, keep everything and burn, or give everything and survive. Most choose burning. Then what's the point? If the system's going to destroy itself anyway. The point is choice, Ruth interrupted. The point is accountability. For 200 years, white men built empires on stolen labor without consequence. Now consequences have arrived. Some will face them with honor. Most won't. But everyone will face them. A knock at the door, 3 slow, 2 fast. The recognition signal. Mama Sable opened it carefully. A young woman slipped inside, breathless. They're coming. Slave hunters tracked us from Savannah. They're 20 minutes out, maybe less. The safe house erupted into controlled chaos. Everyone who'd escaped with them began gathering their few possessions, preparing to scatter into pre-planned routes. But there were too many, 41 people couldn't disappear in 20 minutes. We need a distraction, Isaac said. Something to draw them off while the others run. Ezekiel looked at the ledger spread before him, at his mother's scarred face, at the people he'd escaped with who were now his responsibility. He thought about his comfortable life in Charleston, forever lost. He thought about debts unpaid and scales unbalanced. He thought about what it meant to choose. I'll do it, he said. I'll lead them away. I'm the one they really want, the educated slave who was passing as free. They'll focus on me. Ezekiel, no, Ruth began. You said I had to choose my ledger. This is my choice. He grabbed his mother's hand. You spent 30 years enslaved because of my freedom. Now it's my turn. Lead these people north. I'll buy you time. Ruth's eyes filled with tears, the first emotion beyond determination he'd seen from her. If they catch you, then I'll experience what you experienced. Fully. Completely. And maybe that's the debt I owe. Ezekiel stood, gathering documents he'd need. Besides, I have work to do. Blackwood Plantation needs to receive some additional information about their ledger. And I think a personal visit from an accountant might be illuminating. You're going to Blackwood? Alone? Isaac stared at him. That's suicide. No, Ruth said slowly, understanding dawning. That's accounting. He's going to show Marcus Blackwood exactly what his debts look like. Put a human face on the numbers. And if Blackwood refuses to pay? Mama Sable asked. Ezekiel smiled, and it was his mother's smile, hard and knowing and inevitable. Then the scales will balance themselves. They always do. That's not vengeance. That's mathematics. He grabbed a horse from the safe house stable, the sound of approaching slave hunters growing louder. As he rode toward Blackwood Plantation, toward confrontation, toward truth, toward the final reckoning of debts accumulated over generations, he clutched two ledgers, his father's and his mother's. The scales were out of balance. The accounts demanded settlement. And Ezekiel Brown, former free man, current fugitive, and newly minted accountant of cosmic justice, was going to ensure they were paid. Behind him, 40 souls fled north toward freedom. Ahead of him, a plantation owner faced the choice between restitution and destruction. And somewhere in between, the mathematics of suffering calculated compound interest on 2 centuries of theft. 7 days. 2 remained. The counting continued. Will Ezekiel survive his mission to Blackwood Plantation? Can Marcus Blackwood be convinced to balance his ledger? And what final reckoning awaits when the 7 days expire? Find out in the explosive conclusion, 3-part 17:20 The Ledger of Shadows. The final accounting. Marcus Blackwood was reviewing his quarterly profits when the stranger rode through his gates. The man was young, light-skinned enough to pass for white in dim light, but his torn clothes and the desperation in his eyes marked him as something else, a runaway, perhaps, or worse. Blackwood watched from his study window as his overseers surrounded the rider, rifles raised. The stranger dismounted calmly, raising his hands in surrender. But there was something unsettling about his composure, as if he'd expected this reception. As if he'd planned for it. "Bring him to me," Blackwood called down. "Carefully. He might be valuable." 5 minutes later, Ezekiel Brown stood in Marcus Blackwood's opulent study, shackled but unbowed. The room was lined with ledgers documenting decades of plantation operations, precise records of cotton yields, livestock breeding, and human transactions. Everything organized, everything legal, everything profitable. Everything built on theft. "You rode into my plantation voluntarily," Blackwood said, circling Ezekiel like a predator. "Either you're suicidal or you have a purpose. Which is it?" "I'm an accountant," Ezekiel replied calmly. "I came to discuss your debts." Blackwood laughed. "I have no debts. Blackwood Plantation is one of the most profitable operations in Georgia. My accounts are immaculate. Your financial accounts, perhaps." Ezekiel pulled out his ledger, the one that had appeared in his pocket days ago. "But your moral accounts? Those are catastrophically overdrawn." Blackwood's amusement died. He stared at the ledger, his face going pale. "Where did you get that?" "The same place you got yours. 5 days ago, a courier delivered an iron-bound book to this house. You burned it without reading past the first page. That was a mistake." "How do you?" Blackwood moved to his desk, yanked open a drawer. Inside, beneath papers and documents, lay ashes. The remains of the ledger he'd burned in fury, refusing to acknowledge supernatural intimidation. "I destroyed it." "You destroyed a copy. The original exists elsewhere. And the debts it documents?" Ezekiel opened his own book, began reading. March 1839, purchased Jenny, age 14, separated from her mother Elizabeth. Elizabeth died attempting to reach her daughter, shot while crossing property lines. Jenny was branded as punishment for her mother's crime. She bears your initials on her shoulder still. Stop. October 1843, sold Thomas and his 3 sons to separate buyers to maximize profit. Thomas hanged himself 1 week later. His sons, ages 6, 8, and 11, never saw their father again. 2 died in childhood. The third, now 24, works in your fields and dreams of your death every night. I said stop. Blackwood's voice cracked. This is legal. Everything I've done is sanctioned by law. So was the ledger your grandfather kept, Ezekiel continued remorselessly. So were your father's accounts. 3 generations of Blackwoods, 200 slaves currently in bondage, countless others sold or worked to death. The mathematics are simple, Mr. Blackwood. You owe more than you can ever repay. Blackwood grabbed a pistol from his desk. Get out. Get out before I shoot you where you stand. Shooting me won't balance the scales. Ezekiel's voice was eerily calm. I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to offer you the same choice given to every plantation owner who receives a ledger. You have 2 days left. 2 days to decide whether to balance your accounts willingly or let them balance themselves. This is insanity. Some abolitionist fever dream. Is it? Ezekiel gestured toward the window. Look outside, Mr. Blackwood. Your slaves are watching. They know about the ledger. They know about the accountant. They've been waiting for this moment their entire lives. Their parents waited. Their grandparents waited. Justice delayed isn't justice denied, it's justice taking the long road. And it's arrived. Blackwood looked out the window. In the fields, 200 enslaved people had stopped working. They stood in absolute silence, all facing the main house. Not threatening, not advancing, just watching. Waiting. What do they want? Blackwood whispered. What they've always wanted. Freedom. Land. Compensation for stolen years. The same thing offered at Thornhill Plantation in South Carolina, at Riverside in Virginia, at every estate where owners chose restitution over destruction. And if I refuse? Then in 2 days, the scales balance themselves. Your plantation burns. Your records are destroyed. Your workers disappear into the night. And you, Ezekiel's eyes held terrible certainty, you face whatever judgment the universe reserves for unpaid debts. Blackwood's hand shook on the pistol. Who are you? Really? My name is Ezekiel Brown. My father owned my mother, freed me, kept her enslaved. I spent 32 years living free while she lived in chains. 6 days ago, I received my own ledger. I learned what I'd inherited, what debts I carried without knowing. And I made a choice. What choice? To stop running from the truth. To face what my comfort cost others. To help balance scales I'd unknowingly tipped. Ezekiel held up his ledger. This book contains your crimes, Mr. Blackwood. Every name, every theft, every life destroyed for profit. But it also contains a solution. Divide your land. Compensate your workers. Free everyone and give them the means to build independent lives. It will destroy you financially, socially, permanently, but you'll survive. That's more than you've allowed others. I'll be ruined. Yes. But alive and free to start again. Unlike the people you've kept in bondage for generations. Ezekiel moved toward the door, his shackles rattling. 2 days, Mr. Blackwood. The accountant will return then. I suggest you prepare accordingly. Wait. Blackwood's voice was desperate. Even if I wanted to do this, and I'm not saying I do, how? How am I supposed to divide 2,000 acres, establish compensation, transfer deeds? The legal complications alone. The accountant handles the legal work. She's done this before. All you have to do is agree. Ezekiel paused at the doorway. Your father made a different choice. So did your grandfather. They chose profit over justice, and their debts accumulated until they became yours. You can continue that pattern, or you can end it. But choose quickly, because in 48 hours, the choice won't be yours anymore. He walked out, leaving Blackwood alone with his ledgers, his conscience, and 200 people who'd stopped working to watch the main house and wait for justice. The overseers caught Ezekiel before he reached his horse. They dragged him to the punishment yard, chained him to the whipping post, and waited for Blackwood's orders. But the orders didn't come. Hours passed. The enslaved workers remained in the fields, watching. Not working, not fleeing, just bearing witness. The overseers grew nervous, fingers twitching toward weapons, but unwilling to act without direction from Blackwood. As sunset approached, a woman appeared at the edge of the fields. She was neither young nor old, neither black nor white, but something in between that shifted in the fading light. She carried a ledger that glowed faintly, illuminated from within. And behind her, walking with quiet determination, came Ruth Brown. "Mother," Ezekiel whispered from the whipping post. The accountant, the original, the one who'd started this reckoning 15 years ago at Thornwood Plantation, walked past the frozen overseers as if they were statues. She approached Blackwood's study, and though no one saw her knock, the door opened. Inside, Marcus Blackwood sat surrounded by his family's 3 generations of ledgers, comparing his records against the supernatural book that had appeared despite his burning the first copy. His face was haggard, aged a decade in a single day. "You came back," he said without looking up. "I never left." The accountant sat across from him, her ledger open. "I've been here for days, watching you struggle with the mathematics. Watching you try to find some way to keep your wealth and your conscience. There isn't one. My family built this plantation over 60 years. My grandfather cleared this land from wilderness. With stolen labor. My father expanded the operations, made us profitable. By selling children away from mothers. I've tried to be better than them. I don't whip as much, I don't separate families unless necessary, You still own human beings." The accountant's voice was implacable. "You still profit from their stolen labor. You still maintain a system built on theft. Being a kinder master doesn't balance the scales, Mr. Blackwood. It just means you feel less guilty while perpetuating injustice." Blackwood slammed his fist on the desk. "What do you want from me? Total ruin? Complete destruction? I want you to choose." The accountant gestured toward the window where 200 people still waited. "They're giving you a choice your grandfather never gave them. Your father never gave them. You've never given them. They could burn this house tonight with you in it. They could rise up, take their freedom by force, make you pay in blood what you've stolen in years. But they're waiting. Giving you the chance to do the right thing voluntarily. Why? Why give me any choice at all? Because that's the difference between justice and vengeance." The accountant's eyes, empty voids that somehow contained multitudes, fixed on Blackwood. "Vengeance would be easy. Justice requires work. It requires you to face what you've done, acknowledge the debt, and actively work to balance the scales. That's harder than burning. That's why it matters." She stood, moved to the window. "You have until dawn tomorrow. That's when the 7 days expire. You can divide your land, free your workers, establish compensation, or you can refuse and let the scales balance themselves through fire and chaos. But understand, this isn't negotiable. The debt will be paid. The only question is whether you participate in the payment or become part of it. And if I agree, if I do everything you demand, then you survive. Impoverished but alive. Free to build something new that isn't founded on theft. Your children won't inherit your crimes. The cycle ends with you." The accountant turned back to him. "Isn't that worth more than maintaining an empire built on suffering?" Blackwood looked at his family's ledgers, 60 years of meticulous record-keeping, documenting every transaction, every profit, every life reduced to numbers on a page. He thought about his grandfather, who'd started with 20 slaves and died owning 100. His father, who'd expanded to 200 and been buried in a tomb built with their labor. Himself, maintaining the system because it was profitable, because it was legal, because everyone else was doing it. He thought about the ledger's entries. Children sold. Families separated. Lives stolen year by year, generation after generation, all for his family's profit. He thought about fire on the horizon, 11 plantations burned in the first wave, dozens more in the months since. Owners who'd refused, who'd chosen their wealth over justice, who'd learned too late that some debts can't be denied. "I'll do it," he whispered. "I'll divide the land, free everyone, establish compensation. Just Tell me how. The accountant smiled, sad and knowing and faintly hopeful. We'll begin at dawn. Your workers will witness every transaction, verify every deed, confirm every payment. This won't be charity from master to slaves. This will be restitution. Justice. Payment of debts long overdue. She moved toward the door, then paused. And Mr. Blackwood? There's a young man chained to your whipping post. The one who brought you the truth at great personal risk. I suggest you start your restitution by releasing him. Ezekiel woke to the sound of chains being unlocked. Ruth stood above him, tears streaming down her scarred face. You could have died, she said, helping him stand. Riding in here alone, confronting Blackwood directly, you could have been killed. So could you, Ezekiel replied. Every day for 30 years. At least I got to choose my risk. Behind them, Blackwood emerged from the main house. He looked diminished somehow, as if the decision to release his wealth had physically shrunk him. But his voice was steady as he addressed the 200 people who'd waited through the night. I've made my choice, he called out. Starting at dawn, we begin the division. Every person here will receive land, compensation, and freedom. Legal documents that can't be disputed. This plantation ends today. What comes next is up to all of you. Silence greeted his words. Then, slowly, people began to move. Not celebrating, not rejoicing, just beginning the slow work of transformation. 60 years of slavery wouldn't be undone in a day. But it could begin to be balanced. The accountant appeared beside Ezekiel and Ruth, her ledger open. Another one chooses restitution over destruction. That's 23 plantations now. Out of hundreds. Only 23? Ezekiel asked. Most choose burning. The accountant's voice was matter-of-fact. Most can't imagine giving up power willingly. So the scales balance themselves through fire, chaos, and collapse. The system destroys itself rather than reform. But these 23, and others like them, they prove that change is possible. That justice can be more than destruction. She looked at Ezekiel directly. Your 7 days are complete. Your ledger is balanced, you faced the truth about your inheritance, paid with your own freedom and safety to help others find theirs. But the work isn't finished. There are hundreds more plantations, thousands more debts to document and collect. I could use another accountant. Ezekiel looked at his mother, then at the 200 people beginning to plan their futures as free landowners. He thought about his life in Charleston, comfortable, respectable, built on lies. He thought about what it had cost others for him to live that way. What would I have to do, he asked. Travel. Document. Deliver ledgers. Give people the same choice Blackwood received. Some will choose restitution. Most will refuse. You'll watch plantations burn. You'll help people escape. You'll keep accounts that the universe demands be balanced. The accountant's expression was grave. It's dangerous work. Many who join us don't survive. Slave hunters, angry owners, legal persecution, the system fights back against those who challenge it. But it matters, Ruth added quietly. Every ledger delivered, every choice offered, every debt documented, it all matters. The system can't hide anymore. Can't pretend the theft is victimless. Can't avoid consequences forever. Ezekiel thought about Joshua in the Savannah slave pen, still waiting to be sold. About Mama Sable and Isaac, leading people north on the Underground Railroad. About the 40 souls he'd helped escape, now scattered across safe houses from Georgia to Pennsylvania. He thought about mathematics. About debts accumulated and debts paid. About scales that demanded balance whether humanity chose to provide it or not. I'll do it, he said. Teach me how to read the ledgers properly. How to deliver them. How to document the debts and calculate the restitution. I'll help balance the scales. The accountant handed him his own ledger, no longer showing his father's debts but blank pages waiting to be filled. Then your real education begins. Welcome to the accounting, Ezekiel Brown. May you live to see the day when our services are no longer needed. 3 months later. Ezekiel rode through South Carolina countryside, his saddlebags filled with ledgers and documents. He'd delivered 7 accounting books in the past weeks, supernatural records of crimes committed, debts accumulated, justice denied. 3 plantation owners had chosen restitution. 4 had refused and watched their estates burn. The mathematics were clear, the system was collapsing under the weight of its own debts. Slavery couldn't survive when consequences finally arrived, when the stolen years demanded repayment, when the scales insisted on balance. He arrived at a small plantation outside Columbia, just 40 slaves, a modest operation by regional standards. But the ledger in his bag said the owner, Thomas Garrett, had separated 12 families in the past 5 years alone. The debts were substantial. As Ezekiel prepared to deliver the accounting, he saw a young girl watching him from the slave quarters, perhaps 8 years old, with eyes too old for her face. "You the accountant?" she asked. "I am. My mama said you'd come eventually. Said someone was keeping track of everything they do to us. Said one day the scales would balance." The girl's voice held fragile hope. "Is it true?" Ezekiel dismounted, knelt to her level. "It's true. Every injustice is recorded. Every debt documented. And when the accounting comes due, the scales balance themselves, one way or another. Will we be free? That depends on your owner. He'll receive a choice. He can free you willingly and give you land and compensation. Or he can refuse and face natural correction. Either way, the scales balance. That's not vengeance. That's mathematics." The girl smiled, a small, cautious expression of hope breaking through years of oppression. "Mathematics. I like that." "So do I," Ezekiel said. "It means justice isn't a matter of opinion or mercy. It's inevitable. As certain as numbers in a ledger." He stood, preparing to face Thomas Garrett with documents that would change everything. Behind him, the girl returned to the quarters to spread the word, the accountant had arrived. The counting had begun. The scales would balance. And across the South, in studies and parlors and plantation offices, white men were opening iron-bound ledgers and learning that debts accumulated over centuries had finally come due. Some would choose restitution. Most would choose destruction. But all would choose. Because the accountant never forgot. The ledgers never lied. And mathematics, like justice, could be delayed but never truly denied. Ezekiel walked toward the Garrett house, his own ledger under his arm, ready to deliver the message that was transforming the South one plantation at a time. The reckoning comes. The scales will balance. The debt is due. And this time, payment will be collected, willingly or through fire, choice or chaos, restitution or ruin. But collected nonetheless. Because that's not vengeance. That's mathematics.